How's it going, everyone? This is Paul Garcia with Project Spurs, here to bring a quick video on the Spurs reportedly going to re-sign Joe Wieskamp. So Woj broke the news on August 22nd, a Monday, that the Spurs and Joe Wieskamp, 2-year, $4.4 million deal. Just looking at this deal right now, we can already tell that Wieskamp is likely getting more than the veteran minimum because he has 1 year of experience, and that would be $1.3 million for 1 year. And this looks like an average of about $2.2 million. So we know that the Spurs are using some of their cap space to agree with this deal with Wieskamp. So I want to go through two questions here today. Number one is, what does the roster look like now? You know, how many players do the Spurs now have on the roster? What are Wieskamp's, where does he kind of fit in the rotation? And then the second question will be, you know, what does their financial team outlook look like now going forward for this season, but then also for next offseason as well. So as we look at an early look at their depth chart, this is just something that I made. It's nothing official. I have here the players in red are players on non-guaranteed deals, and then the players here in the bold are players who either have guaranteed deals or they're two-way players. So they, you know, basically a guaranteed deal as well. So there's three players, should I say, who are going to be on non-guaranteed deals. That's Trey Jones, who has a partially guaranteed deal for $500,000. Then they have Keita Bates-Diop and Alize Johnson. And so right now, once Wieskamp signs and then once Johnson signs, Alize Johnson, the Spurs are going to have 19 players on the roster. And that's okay for the offseason. They can go into training camp and into the preseason with 19 players, but it's right before the regular season game tips off on October 19th. The Spurs need to waive two players in this case. So right now, just because they have non-guaranteed, most likely be Keita Bates-Diop and Alize Johnson don't end up maybe a full roster by the time the regular season comes by. So again, with Wieskamp being added, so there's 19 players. As far as where Wieskamp plays, there's quite a few players ahead of him. Players like Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell, Malachi Branham, rotation. Josh Richardson's still there as well. So again, he could play the 2 or the 3. We don't know exactly where the Spurs are going to put him, but right now he's got quite a few players in front of him, most likely. But the Spurs again did invest in him for 2 years to try to see what he turns into as a player in these next 2 years, especially having him as a two-way player last year and then also a regular season player toward the end. Where the rotation, let's keep in mind again that they're going to have to waive more players before the first game of the regular season. Now let's go ahead and look at some financial questions with Wieskamp back on the team and what his contract does for their financial outlook for the Spurs. So let me pull this up real quick. Okay, so a few of these tabs are kind of small, but then they'll get larger on other screens. So basically, with all cap holds and non-guaranteed deals still in the books, the Spurs have about $22 million in cap space right now. And again, this is when we put in those cap holds and players in non-guaranteed deals. And this is with an estimate of Wieskamp at $2.2 million for this season. What are their likely moves? Like I mentioned, they most likely end up waiving Keita Bates-Diop and Alize Johnson. So if that happens, well, then they still have $31.8 million in cap space. So again, they can still, there's really not a lot of free agents out there to sign, but they have that $31.8 million to work with, because again, that's key if they want to be a team who ends up getting into trade discussions for a player on a large contract on a veteran player. Then the Spurs could be one of those teams who can take in a big contract for future draft assets. And so just one rumor that's been out there all season is if the Lakers and the Nets were going to try to move Russell Westbrook to off the Lakers team so that the Lakers could acquire Kyrie Irving, a third team would be needed, and San Antonio would be in perfect place there if that was the case to work with the deal to try to get Westbrook on their team, and then maybe waive him down the road, and again get those draft picks from the Lakers in that kind of situation. So again, the Spurs still have a lot of options they can make with this $31.8 million in cap space that they would have open. The most cap space they can open up is $33.1 million. So this would be if the Spurs would waive everyone that's on a non-guaranteed deal and include Trey Jones, who has a $500,000 guaranteed. So if that happened, $33.1 million, and again, plenty of options to make there. Another question is what is their salary floor? How far are they from the minimum that their team in the offseason? They're about $19.5 million away from the salary floor. So if that's the case, all the way up until the end of the regular season, well then these 15 to 17 players on the roster could end up getting a nice over $1 million check each if the Spurs are still haven't met the salary floor. So that's kind of where they're at in that question, is that they're about $19.5 million away. And then what is their cap space? So next offseason, they still have a lot of cap space. They even with Wieskamp at 2.2 million, and this would be assuming that they have the worst record in the league and they end up getting the number one pick in the draft. If that all happens, the projected number one pick would get $11.8 million in year one of his new contract. And so even if that all happens, the Spurs could open up still about $60.7 million in cap space next offseason. So they can definitely still be a major player in free agency next offseason. So again, those are just a few questions I wanted to answer here and kind of just talk about, get my thoughts out there on Joe Wieskamp returning to the Spurs.